What do you think most people misunderstand about what it truly takes to build a great relationship?
I think most people think that it's given, so that if it goes well, it maybe is because they're a special person, or if it goes poorly, maybe it's because they're unlucky. This is called actually the fundamental attribution error in psychology. The reversal of it is that if other people have good fortune, they got lucky. And if other people have bad fortune, they deserved it somehow. That's a common sort of bias that you can discover, which is, of course, not universal. People can pay attention to that, but it does illustrate kind of a feature that does occur in relationships where there's a kind of presumption of inertness, passivity. I think that's especially true in the area of romance. There's a little more awareness in working relationships about the value of emotional intelligence and social intelligence there. And so one of the things, on the other hand, that research has shown again and again, and my own life experience has really demonstrated, as well as the life experience of, at this late stage of my career, thousands of people, truly, just factually, that I've interacted with around these sorts of things, that so much of our fate in our relationships is in our own hands. There's kind of a range, right? Depending on what you're given, depending on the situation, the other person, factors in your own life. There's sort of a range here. I'm putting up my hands, so that there's a bottom end of the range and the high end of the range. And what's in our hands is not that range. That's out of our hands. But what happens within that range is very much under our own influence through thoughts, words, and deeds. And my recent book, Making Great Relationships, is about how we can indeed make great relationships. Now, great, I want to underline, might mean a relationship with somebody that is great as long as you have lunch with them once a year. Or it's great as long as you leave the family gathering before Uncle Bob has started drinking. Maybe that's what makes it great, but at least it's great for you and hopefully for other people. So that's the biggest understanding, the power that we have, the agency, and thus, if you will, the responsibility to make the best use we can of those opportunities.
Yeah, in some ways, I wonder if we've been fed this lie of effortlessness when it comes to relationships, perhaps in other things in our lives as well, such as career or creativity. And we associate effortlessness with this compatibility or chemistry, because in some ways there are people that where you have an easier relationship with, where things do feel are much easier to progress along or to spend time with than others. So perhaps this is kind of what led us to believe that everything should be effortless and everything should just be going smoothly without that constant practice of iterating on love and communication skills and so forth. And you talk about love not as a feeling, but as a practice, even a skill. How can we learn to love better by understanding how the brain really works?
Oh, huge question. So much in that. Briefly, where we have influence, in a world in which we do not have influence about many, many things, the genetic lottery we're born with, structural factors in our society of different kinds that advantage some by disadvantaging others, the weather, global warming, stuff happens in life. Other people fall out of love with us potentially, even though we are still in love with them. So there's so much we don't have control over. And these days, especially, given the rate of change and also the breakdown, frankly, culturally and politically and even economically, of many systems that help to regulate things and enable people to find sort of a softer landing when times are hard, as all that kind of is blown up and falling apart, it's more important than ever to claim the power we do have from the inside out, to influence things as best we can. It's not to replace doing the best we can to change society. It's to acknowledge, hey, in the real world, rescue is not coming. And it's kind of on me to help my relationship here be as good as possible. So in that context then, the brain, the brain in love. Brain is very complex, 3 pounds of tofu-like tissue inside the coconut, 85 billion neurons, miss another 100 billion or so, support cells, neurons making on average several thousand connections with each other called synapses, sparkling away. Charles Sherrington referred to the brain as the enchanted loom, continually weaving the fabric of consciousness. So it's wild. A lot of stuff going on. There's been research on parts of the brain that get particularly active during the early stages of romance that have a very intensely rewarding quality to them. And these are regions as well in the subcortex in the middle of the brain that are also engaged if we are feeling highly rewarded and pleasurized in other areas, like succeeding at a slot machine or taking cocaine. They're not equivalent, but it just does speak to some of the neural correlates of early stages of romance and so on, which then tend to be more diffuse over time. Although there are couples 30 years in who, when you show them a picture of their partner inside an fMRI scanner, the same reward centers deep in the ancient reward systems of the brain also still activate, still light up. So it's kind of a hopeful thing for those of us, as I am now 43 years in, those of us who are in a long-term marriage. So there's a lot of general research. I would say I'm not aware of anything specific about the brain in love that's actually relevant to practice to making great relationships. There is, on the other hand, a lot about the brain that's generally useful. And I would just here name 2 key points that are super practical takeaways. And you can apply them to other situations as well, like your work or motivating yourself to exercise or things like that. The first is that the brain has a negativity bias. It is like Velcro for bad experiences, but Teflon for good ones. And that's because as our ancestors evolved for 600 million years, in terms of the evolution of the nervous system, negative events had more urgency and impact, typically, than positive events. So the brain evolved a bias toward overlearning from fairly ordinary today experiences of stress, irritation, frustration, awkwardness in an interaction. There are many examples of that. I could go into it in detail, but I'll just hit that headline right now. Negativity bias. So being aware of that, and it's very useful in horrible conditions, but in everyday life, it biases us toward internalizing extra emotional pain in emotional memory, and it biases us toward conflicts with other people. You know, they say that one word, it really lands, and we don't like them, or it's payback time. And then our form of payback on them, because of their negativity bias, gets amplified. And then now you're in a vicious cycle. And obviously that has a lot of implications, not just at a personal level, but more even group against group, nation against nation level as well. Negativity bias. Second big headline, we have opportunities through what's called neuroplasticity, and in particular, what's called positive neuroplasticity. We have many opportunities multiple times a day to compensate for the negativity bias and help our brains learn from the experiences we're having. We can actually steepen our growth curve, our return on investment, our ROI on our experiences. We can increase that through very simple things that are evidence-based neurologically that you can do in the moment to help whatever you're experiencing that's good for you to really help it sink in. So it does not wash through your brain like water through a sieve, while those negative experiences are routinely caught and then internalized. Simple things like stay with the experience for a half a breath or longer to keep the neurons firing together so they can eventually wire together. Feel it in your body. If you're with your partner and you experience something you care about, like being liked, or you maybe realize that it would be better if you acted a certain way with your partner or a coworker or your boss, and you have a sense of that way of being or acting in your body, stay with it and even feel it in your body, and also be aware of what is feels good about it, what's enjoyable about it or meaningful, what's rewarding. That will increase activity of dopamine and norepinephrine in the hippocampus, key part of your brain. Technically, there are two hippocampi, and that will help you really internalize that experience more. Point being, there are plenty of things we can do. 5 seconds here, 5 minutes there, once or two or 5 times a day, so that we actually steepen our gains from the day in who we are becoming every single day. And that incremental additional gain through these practices of deliberate internalization, deliberately taking in the good to grow the good that lasts inside. Those incremental gains on that single day, maybe, mild to moderate, but as they accumulate, they mark an incredible difference between a person who's engaging these internal practices of deliberate internalization, deliberate receptivity to increase neuroplastic change in your own brain. The difference between the person who's routinely doing that and the person who's not routinely doing that becomes greater and greater as the weeks and then years add up.
Yeah, yeah. I brought that up for that connection between love and the brain, because I just feel so much of our nomenclature of how we describe love, emotions, and feelings is not necessarily connected to the brain. We talk about, oh, I have butterflies on my stomach. I have this gut feeling that something's going to go bad. I'm heartbroken. None of it really has anything to do with the brain, which is really where everything happens. And I wonder if a lot of the difficulties that we have around relationship comes from lack of that self-awareness and internal awareness that needs to be had. And I guess talk to us a little bit about that. What is the danger of what happens when we're continuously just following our emotions and our gut feelings, quote unquote, instead of analyzing more in a logical way of why we're feeling the way we're feeling?
Nice. Well, I do this in 2 parts. The first part, you're totally right. The ongoing constructing of this moment of experience, in simple terms, this moment of hearing, seeing, thinking, remembering, sensing, wanting, this moment for you and for me, for anyone listening or watching, is being constructed. It's being made, thus making great relationships. It's being made by a vast network of factors that extend from the brain into the nervous system, into the body, and then outward into life and culture and the Big Bang altogether. All right. That said, the final common pathway of those many factors that are shaping, conditioning, and constructing this moment of what it's like to be you, that final common pathway runs right between your ears. So it's really helpful to appreciate, as I think you do, both and that, yes, it's not just a brain-centric way of looking at things. And gosh, this extraordinary organ really matters. So both can be true. And then that certainly goes to your question, which is great, which is we're having all these reactions. And if people are treating you really well, if you can stand it, your reactions to that are just great. There's no problem, right? But what if the other person is cranky? What if they let you down? You're at work, you counted on them and they let you down, or they badmouthed you and you just heard about it from somebody else, or your boss is pretty good in some ways, but wow, never acknowledges anything good and is hypercritical about anything bad. Life, or you're stuck in traffic, you have to get to a meeting, or you're watching TV and something is on the television that just really upsets you. What do you do then? And in the moment, one of the best things you can do is to be aware of being triggered. being reactive to what's happening. That capacity for self-awareness, there are fancy terms for that in the long history of psychology, like the observing ego. There's a modern recognition of ancient traditions around the world, around, let's say the word in general, mindfulness. People mean it slightly differently in different ways, but let's use that word in general. The value of that capacity for me, as a long-term therapist, someone comes into my office, in part because typically their challenges are bigger than their resources. So what resource, inside and outside, would really help? And one of the preeminent resources inside is the ability to step back from the movie of whatever you're feeling right now, and watch it on the screen. You're still feeling it, but being able to watch it from 10 rows back, wow, that is painful, or wow, anger, wow, dread, wow, shock, wow, feel so sad. Just that alone, for me, is 50% of therapy. If they can do that, we're halfway there. We're halfway home, because a lot of people can't. And there's research that shows that literally just quietly verbalizing to yourself in a kind of objective way. You're not criticizing what you're experiencing or praising it. You're just noting it. Just using a word like anxious, irritated, so pissed off. Just naming it, actually in the brain, increases activity in executive regions behind the forehead that kind of calm things down and bring perspective. And just noting it reduces activity in a different part of the brain, in these subcortical emotional, kind of ancient emotional machinery regions. Obviously, the whole brain is involved in emotion. But anyway, like the amygdala, which is sort of an alarm bell in the brain. It's kind of, chill out, little baby amygdala, calm it down. So yeah, it's really, really helpful. And then, and to be clear, you're not resisting what you're feeling. You're not suppressing it. That doesn't work well. It tends to come back. But what you are doing is you are not being hijacked by it, and you are not fueling and following it, right? Because then that just makes those reactions even worse. Last, additionally, as you do this mindfulness in the moment, you develop more self-awareness over time. You start to recognize more and more, oh, that's what I learned in junior high school. And it made sense then to learn that way of being, not learning an idea. I acquired that way of being interpersonally. Oh, that's why I feel this way when I'm in a setting. Quick example, I was a kind of a shy, quiet, nerdy kid who skipped a grade. I have a late birthday, so I was very young going through school, and I felt very much on the outside of the cool kids, right? And so now today, many years later, I may be in a setting with a bunch of cool kids who have usually a bunch of gray hair at this point, and I will still feel a little echo, at least, even though I've practiced with this for 50 years or more. I could still feel a little bit of an echo of feeling little Ricky, small, invisible, better hunkered down, and nobody really likes me, nobody really wants me. I'll just kind of disappear off to the edge here, which is a learned pattern from my time in school as a kid. So point being, as we observe ourselves and get to know ourselves better in the moment, in real time, we then get to know ourselves better, more fundamentally, and then we become increasingly free inside. That material is still there. We can have compassion for it, and yet we're not so likely to be hijacked by it. There's a growing spaciousness of awareness in which all the parts of ourselves are included. They all belong. They all have a role. They're all trying to help, even if they're a little misguided. And that sense of overall inclusion and spaciousness and integration is very good for people. You don't feel so fragmented. You don't feel so pulled in conflicting ways. It feels much more balanced and even and frankly, peaceful. It's really helpful for well-being.
Yeah. And what's the science behind acknowledging the feelings that you're going through at a moment, like anxiety or stress or worry, Is it more that the more we run away for something, the more it attracts towards us, and almost acknowledging it leads to familiarity, and whatever we're familiar with, we're less afraid of, we're less daunted by. Is that kind of the idea? Can you kind of explain what is the benefit of acknowledging it?
Great. So we'll start with the harms of not acknowledging it. There's a term called experiential avoidance. And if people, if you look at people who, let's say, are pretty unhappy or are fairly dysfunctional in some way, or they might be highly functional, let's say at work, but in their personal relationships, particularly a family type relationship with an intimate partner, they're not doing so well. Well, why? What are some fundamental factors here? And actually, two tend to really stand out. It's a complicated thing, and what I'm saying is it's a generalization. There are many exceptions, right? But one factor is what's called low distress tolerance. It's a term. It just means basically people don't feel their feelings, or they really shy away from them. Now, to be clear, for some people, especially with a trauma history, keeping those feelings at bay is useful as an intermediate strategy on the road to, hopefully, a long-term healing. But until that long-term healing comes, it's important to not be so flooded. It's important to kind of keep a lid on the basement. Name it, know it's there, but be cautious about that. So I want to name this as appropriate, individualized kind of caution for people. But in general, if people repress their feelings, this goes back to psychoanalysis. Repression pushes it down in the unconscious, but the brain and the mind is a storage system. It's not a flush toilet. It's like a septic tank. You put that stuff in, it's not going anywhere, and it tends to leak and come to the surface again. So there's a lot of research on that. I'm not aware of any the particular neural correlates of that exact process. I suspect they're complicated, but the fundamentals are really well established. You want to find this balanced place where we're not, shoving our painful feelings down, nor are we flooded by them. I'm trying to find that place in the middle, and it helps to increase mindfulness and other things like a sense of inner calm, a sense of that others are supportive of you, so we can stay in that middle place. So that's one. There's a lot of research on that. And then two, the other major, kind of common negative factor on average is negative rumination. And the two go together in interesting ways. So rumination being, as you know, comes from the term like cows chew their cud. They ruminate, they chew, they have multiple stomachs, so they keep chewing. Rumination is not productive, forward-moving, reflecting on something. And it's not just allowing feelings to flow for a while. I was in a situation yesterday, frankly, that really rattled me. And I could still feel I was kind of rattled today. I don't think I was ruminating about it, but it just took a while it was an especially rattling experience about something that's very important to me, that just sort of reverberated through me. That's not rumination. And, thinking about the nice dinner you might be having tonight with someone you like, or cool experience you had recently. I go rock climbing occasionally still. That's not ruminating. Ruminating is saturated with negative affect and is repetitive and not productive. You're looping, you're doing laps around the pain track, which unfortunately, because of neuroplasticity, neurons that fire together, wire together, deepens the grooves of that pain track. Negative rumination, not so good. Now, there's a lot of brain science about rumination that has a lot of very super cool implications, which edge into spiritual practice, the deep end of the pool. In a nutshell, the primary neural circuitry, if you will, basis, a key basis, I'll call it that, is in the so-called default mode network, which is in the midline toward the rear. And when we ruminate, we sometimes kind of oscillate back and forth between the default mode network and a part of the brain more toward the front that's about trying to get things done. So sometimes we ruminate about doing something like the conversation we wish had gone differently, or what we're going to do in the future, but we're afraid to do because of what they might do, so forth. So the circuitry is pretty established. And here's a fantastic circuit breaker. Yeah, right on the spot. Research shows that if you deliberately tune in to what's called interoception, you tune in to your internal sensations of breathing, chest rising and falling, movements of joints through space. If you do that, that engages a part of your brain called the insula, and that disrupts rumination. It kind of is a circuit breaker for activity in the default mode network. The activity in the default mode network tends to be very much involving what's called mental time travel. People ruminate about the future and the past. Interestingly, when you come into the present, that disrupts mental time travel in general. And when you're really in the present, you're quite aware of novelty. You're quite aware of the immediacy of the arising moment. Even without a big meditative practice, you're in the present moment. And therefore, you're engaging technically the very front end of the attention system that's alerting. So you're in the present, being alerted again and again and again to whatever's new. And when we're being alerted by something, that also is a circuit breaker for the default mode network. Because if you're back in Jurassic Park or the Stone Age, you're walking down the path, ruminating about the argument you had with, the chief hunter in your band, and you're walking along the path, and suddenly, there's a sound in the bushes nearby, and you're suddenly alerted to it. You're no longer lost in space. You're like, whoop. So you can help yourself do that without worrying about a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes, to just become in the present as much as you can. And it will disrupt rumination. The last thing I'll say about rumination is that it often functions as a defense against feeling or acknowledging wanting at a deeper level. No. So we ruminate in the service often of quote unquote experiential avoidance, of avoiding experiences. So one way you can help yourself too is if you're ruminating about something, ask yourself, after you've gone around the track 5 times, that's enough. Ask yourself, this is not resolving, it's not productive. What's deeper? What's younger in the mix here? What am I feeling more deeply? If I really let myself be vulnerable inside myself, no one needs to know you're doing this. Inside myself, what is my ruminating keeping at bay that could come forward? And I can invite those deeper feelings to come forward. I can invite those deeper wants to be known, to be named, those longings in my heart. And I can invite that younger material that has been re-triggered by this current events that I'm ruminating about. I can really listen to that younger material. And when we open to those things, rumination often diminishes too.
Fascinating. So the idea when we're ruminating on these unproductive thoughts, you're saying, instead of thinking about the fear of something that has happened in the past, potentially repeating, think about what you're missing out on if you were to stop ruminating. Is that right? The potential benefits rather than, it's almost like having faith over fear.
That's very interesting. If that works for a person, great. And like anything we talk about, especially me, focus on whatever's good for you. The point I'm making here, because I'm a long-term shrink, this is how we think. We always think, what's the function this is serving, right? So what's the function? And very often the function of rumination is to keep at bay experiences that people dread. They're afraid to feel more deeply, or they're afraid to acknowledge what they really long for, or they're afraid to get in touch with a younger part of themselves. And so it's to disrupt that function that ruminating is serving and keeping it going. It really can help to be brave enough and self-aware, going back to your good points about self-awareness, brave enough and self-aware enough to open to what's underneath, what's below the table.
And if somebody is in a situation where they've been repeatedly hurt or heartbroken, how do they open up their heart again without being vulnerable to potentially more pain? How do you distinguish a healthy level of caution when they're in a situation where they're constantly being broken, and this emotional armor? How do you balance the two?
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I mean, not beautiful. I mean, beautiful question. Not beautiful that person is suffering. Yeah. Well, let's see. Several things can help, and I'm very practical, and I'm kind of a checklist guy. I hope that's okay. I just sort of go through things that could help, and that for me are about empowering people so they now know what they can do and use the power they do have, use the influence they do have for their lives. So it depends first on the degree to which a person has sort of processed what happened. Because if there's a whole bunch of unprocessed material, kind of that sludge in this sort of jar, on a shelf in the mind, let's say, that jar's not really processed, and, vapors are coming out of it that are sort of smelly and scary, and, so that's going to affect a person a lot. On the other hand, if they have maybe reflected on what occurred, perhaps by talking with friends or a spiritual guide or a counselor or coach, or just talking with themselves, if they've reflected on what happened and helped themselves to flow with the feelings, so the feelings are not stuck in the jar, letting them flow. That doesn't mean dumping your guts on the table in a business meeting. It just means appropriate levels of opening and feeling and flowing. And when we open and feel and flow, things tend to flow fairly quickly through us. It is almost never as bad as we fear to actually open up to what we feel. Okay. Also, there can be perspective, like you realize, wow, that's the third time in a row I picked a romantic relationship with this kind of sexy, flashy, somewhat chaotic person because I thought it would be a thrill. And wow, after the first few weeks, it just became a real trouble for me. Well, maybe there's a pattern there when you reflect on that. And there's learning. No praise, no blame. Just learning. Just what's the opportunity here? So first point is around the degree to which a person is actually processed and sort of learned from, which can take, many cycles through over time. We learn a lot, and then a year later we think back on it and we learn something else. All right. But there can be some good learning at the front end. Second, a lot of relationships, whether in work environments or in, romantic settings or friendship settings, are very affected by selection. Who do you pick? And who you pick, is constrained by all sorts of things, but still we tend to have a lot of options, especially in modern societies. Do you pick? Do you find yourself repeating certain patterns that you end up working with people who are frankly not up to your speed? Or do you find yourself in situations where the culture is very critical and high pressure and ignores work-life balance, tends to be functionally discriminating against people who are committed to their families and their children? You pay attention to that. So think newly, like, okay, how can I help myself end up in a relationship at work or in romance, let's say, that is the odds are better that it's going to go well. I recently had a kind of a broad situation in my life where I realized that, going forward, to the extent I can really do this, I'm going to I'm going to choose to work with only people who are highly capable. Second, have a high work ethic, are really committed to excellence as an aim. And third, are loyal to the initiative, the enterprise, the company, or me. There's some sense of loyalty there. Those three criteria for me all need to be checked if I'm going to involve myself with a person in the future, certainly in a work type setting. You can have similar criteria, so that selection. And then it really helps to, it helps to be active, third, in repairing along the way, so you're less likely to get your heart broken. For example, early on in a relationship, if somebody does something that's sort of a yellow flag for you, and then you talk about it or try to talk about it, and they refuse to repair, that's a red flag for any significant relationship. If that family member or that friend or coworker or romantic partner will not repair, it means that the relationship needs to shrink to a size that's actually safe for you. And sometimes what happens is we can see that fairly early on, and then we shrink, we resize the relationship so we are less vulnerable in it and less likely to get hurt. And I've written about this a fair amount, including in my book, Resize Your Relationship. And it's one of the most useful parts of the book, how to actually resize a relationship as it goes forward and you understand it better. And knowing that you can resize it can help you be more willing to open up. Yeah. And then the last thing I would say is that the more that we resource ourselves to be able to tolerate painful experiences, this goes to experiential avoidance and distress tolerance, the more able you are to handle rejection. And so that it is not devastating, so that it does not pull up your whole history from childhood, maybe of trauma or being rejected by kids in school, or my own small example in my own case of feeling isolated and not wanted and, disappeared. As you work with that material and you get, frankly, more able to tolerate the bumps and the waves of regular life, then you're more willing to venture out into the depths of relationship. Last thing, really, I think is so helpful is to have confidence in yourself that's deserved and earned. Most people have far less confidence in themselves than they deserve. For every arrogant, pompous, narcissistic, maybe sociopathic asshole, there are 99 people who are full of self-doubt, quick to highlight negativity bias, their shortcomings, and very slow to recognize what a fundamentally good person you are. It's interesting how we walk down the street and we can recognize someone very quickly, like, oh yeah, you're a basically good person. Work in progress, not perfect, no saint, and basically good person. Think about how hard it is to give ourselves that recognition, to realize, wow, I'm really okay. I'm pretty good, And so think in the realm of romance, think about yourself. You're here to love. You have a warm heart. You have a learning curve. You're trainable in a sense. You can learn. You're kind of a catch. You're pretty cool. You've got a lot going for you. You're not some movie star, handsome or gorgeous, fine. And still, you're plenty good enough, and to feel that and to know that, so that while as you know this, if that other person just doesn't want you, you're not their cup of tea, you don't take it so personally. And maybe you even think to yourself kind of quietly, well, I'm glad you told me now, not 5 years from now, and that's your loss, buddy boo. I'm on to the next fish in the sea, and there are a lot of them, and I'm a catch.
Yeah. Would you categorize the feeling and the state of having imposter syndrome, which you mentioned that a lot of people have? Do you consider that to be healthy in any way, or is it mostly a harm to our mental health and the happiness we want to live? Because I guess having an imposter syndrome for me, this is a struggle that I've had for a while that I'm slowly uncovering, and I associate it with almost this pessimistic or suffering and the familiarity of that, as I grew up in a very strict family hold where, A wasn't good enough, A plus is the way to go. And the idea of suffering to succeed has become familiar. And what if I or other people are afraid to stop suffering because it's the suffering that gives them familiarity and the comfort, because they've associated that with having some level of success before, and they're afraid of letting that go because perhaps not being so hard on ourselves and not having imposter syndrome will prevent us from being motivated. How can you unwire that or rewire that?
That's a great question. Super duper and very relevant. Appropriate modesty and humility is healthy. An accurate assessment that's neutral, no praise, no blame, accurate assessment of your strengths and weaknesses in different areas, that's healthy. Imposter syndrome is not healthy. Feelings of inadequacy or self-criticism that are not aligned with that accurate assessment is not healthy. Arrogance, conceit, narcissism, or worse, that is not aligned with your accurate assessment of your own abilities and responsibilities is not healthy. Those things are not healthy. What is healthy is to aspire without attachment. What is healthy is to be drawn toward what you will gain rather than move away from the sharp stick at your back as a dreaded punishment for any form of falling short. That form of motivation, fear of pain, is effective in the short run. It's effective for rats and it's effective for people. But over time, in addition to creating a lot of unnecessary suffering along the way, it produces what's called allostatic load in the body, in our hormones, our GI tract, in our nervous system, certainly in our immune system, and in our mind as we gradually, negativity bias, gradually accumulate all those negative emotions, the residues gradually accumulate inside us. And that wears down performance over time. Most people who are peak performers in their career over the long haul are happy warriors. They are enthused. They are much more drawn toward the light than they are afraid of the shadows. They are much more drawn to the rewards, the enthusiasm, what their vision is, than the fear of failing, the fear of falling short. And so it's extremely useful to appreciate that many of us have been lied to. The lies of our parents and their parents and their parents' parents' parents were well-intended. They worked, but they were lies. They were not accurate. The people who said them believed they were true, but they're actually not true at all. We can be highly motivated, highly ambitious, passionate, enthusiastic, focused. We can work hard. We can be tenacious. Factually, I'm these things myself. We can be this way without carrying self-doubt and feelings of inadequacy that haunt us from our history. To be free of that, to gradually cut those cords can take a fair amount of inner work. The brain is designed to learn from its experiences, especially negative experiences, particularly negative experiences when we were young, and above all, young negative experiences that involved other people. No wonder we feel that way 10, 20, 50 years later. It's natural. It's normal to feel that way. It's not a failing that you still feel that way, but it is your work to do. And it's there to do. But as you do it more and more, those ghosts, if you will, those burdens gradually fade. And it takes a lot to trigger them today. And often they don't get triggered at all. Remembering and looking for models that you can be a badass peak performer while being enthusiastically motivated toward the good rather than fearing that you're going to fail as the bad. Remembering that can be really, really useful.
Yeah, it's a great point. I was thinking about, I don't know if you know Peter Crone, but he said this quote that really stuck out to me, which is, we're just using our history to predict something, and then we're trying to protect ourselves from it, not realizing what we should be doing is perpetuating the history that was yet to actually reconcile. And for layman terms for people, basically meaning that we think we're protecting ourselves from the past, but we're actually repeating it because we never actually healed it. And I can think of so many things around relationships and, my previous mention around coinciding struggle with success to not really let go. But it reminds me of kind of what your point was around confidence deserved, meaning I think this idea of imposter syndrome could slowly melt away as we gain that internal confidence within ourselves. I want to talk about that a little bit, which is how can we gain, what are some practicable ways to gain self-respect for ourselves and to have that inner confidence?
Great. Well, there are two sides to that coin. One is, what are the practical ways to release old and now inaccurate feelings of inadequacy? So that's part of the process, becoming aware of them. And then fundamentally, you have to let them in to let them out the door. So you feel them. Typically the feeling is a matter of only seconds. But you have to feel them. You have to experience them out. So that's one part of the path. And have also perspective and wisdom when you look back. And to give yourself credit. And one way to give yourself credit for the past and the present is to be clear about what a fair standard is, which is often what we apply to other people, but we do not apply to ourselves. So if you think back on, let's say, the challenges you had in high school, I'll just use that as an example, whatever challenges they were, pressures, your family, health issues, other kids, other people, bad luck, something. And when you take a look at the overall package of how you managed those 4 years as a kid, 13 to 18, somewhere in that range, probably 14 to 18, maybe. Wow. What's your view? Like, pretty good, probably a lot of the time. One version of that for me is I realized some years ago that growing up, I had been a nerd, but not a wimp. So processing the past, that's one side of the coin. The other side, in the present, take in the good. When there is factual evidence that for you is authentic of your abilities, your intentions, and the responses of other people to you, and your accomplishments, when there's factual evidence of those things, let yourself feel proportionally worthy, satisfied, reassured, not narcissistically pounding yourself on the back because you managed to brush your teeth today, but realistically, like, yeah. And when you have that experience, then notice the fact, let yourself feel the fact, and then take in the feeling. Those 3 steps, several times a day, extremely effective. And that includes the sense that other people care about you. And then for the bonus, do. You want the bonus here? Probably want the bonus. You can do what I call linking. It's a standard method in both modern psychotherapy and in the wisdom traditions, where you're aware of 2 things at once. Let's say you're aware today of the sense of accomplishment and worth related to completing a work project. or just simply getting through a hard time. You're on the other side of it now. So you're feeling that experience today of worth. And you could also be aware, if you want, in the background of awareness, kind of small and mild, and in the background, old feelings of inadequacy, old feelings of falling short in your home, because you brought a report card that was all A's, but a few of them were A minuses. And when you're aware of two things, neurons that fire together, wire together, the current positive will start to associate with that old negative and gradually ease it and soothe it and even eventually replace it. So you no longer have it with you. That process of, for me, it was like putting in, I came into a college at 16 with what felt like a huge hole in my heart, and just a lack of social supplies, we're calling them. They're called. And I gradually filled up that hole in my heart. And people today can gradually fill up that hole in their own heart around worth, and can also gradually soothe and heal wounds from their history, like rejections from others, harsh criticism, shaming that came our way. We really can, over time, do that in exactly the way I've described. Notice the good facts, let yourself have the good feelings, take in the good feelings, and sometimes, if you want, connect the current good feelings today to that old material. And you will gradually change your brain for the better.
Yeah, that's very helpful for people that can break it down into those steps. And just to kind of shift forward, assuming they've done the work within themselves, they're ready to build that relationship. The work within ourselves is probably the hardest part, right? But let's say that's done. And now we have to translate that into a better relationship with another person who hopefully has also done the work. But there's never a perfect relationship, obviously. But when we're trying to be selective with who the right partner should be, are there specific questions you should ask yourself to decide if this is the right person for you?
Okay. Well, you're getting at two things. You're getting at selection, right? Which is the questions, is this person the right person for you? Which I'll get into. And then you're also getting into, how can I get what I need from that person? How can I influence them, frankly, to have a growth curve themselves? How can I, if there's something I care about, frankly, in adult relationships, they are transactional. They're not necessarily completely unconditional. So there's things you want to get. You want to get more attention. You want them to listen to you. You want them to stop interrupting you. You want them to do their share of the housework. You want them to be engaged in raising the children. You want them to support you in front of their family. You want them to make love. Whatever it might be, we want things from other people romantically, and you can translate that into workplace relationships and friendships as well. So how do we do that? So there's a lot in the book, Making Great Relationships, that's about negotiating. How do you communicate? How do you assert yourself? How do you increase the odds that the other person will be responsive? Maybe we could talk, maybe a little bit about that. I find in general that if you're brave enough to speak from your heart while saying what's true for you, may not be true for them, it may not be true in ultimate reality, but for you, it is real, that you have asked them to, let's say, come home for dinner to be with you and the kids at a regular time, and they keep coming home an hour and a half late, and they never acknowledge it. And you'd really like that to change from now on. My experience is that most people, when approached in that sort of a kind of a heartfelt, factual request for the future, rather than shaming attack about the past, most people are pretty responsive to that. And if they're not, that's definitely an orange flag. Because how do you go forward in a deep way with someone who will not repair with you? And so there's that part. Now, the selection, romantically, my own view about it is that you probably have some basics in your mind. I mean, I'll tell you my basics, sort of. I've been married a long time now. They're not relevant currently, but they are relevant because they keep being fulfilled currently. with my wife Jan. I want to be with someone who has, I'll just call it, good character. They're basically honest. They're basically decent. They have integrity. They have a conscience, even if they don't feel like it. They live by their basic morality. Not in a perfect way, but they're pretty serious about it. They're not an asshole. Or if occasionally they go into asshole mode, and I'm sure I have myself, they don't want to routinely be there, and they acknowledge their impact on other people. So I want someone like that. I want to be with someone who's basically happy. It's true there are many people who are not basically happy, and some of them are grappling with trauma and depression and the biology that drags them down, or they're in circumstances that are, of course, horrible. You want to take that into account. If someone's really unhappy because they are also in the refugee camp that you're stuck in somewhere, you take that into account. But basically, someone who's fairly cheerful, I want that. I want someone who is bright because, kind of I can relate to, they have certain qualities. It would be hard for me to be with someone whose politics was radically different from my own, because so much of that now, especially these days, boils down to basic questions of values and morality. And I think our morality is what we do, not what we say. And so I'd want to be with a person who really cares about not harming people and really cares about justice and compassion. So, that's kind of me. And then last one, I'll leave it there with this one, that they see the good in me. My own view is that if you're dating, and you're starting to meet people, after a reasonable amount of time, like a threshold, you decide what that threshold is. For me, it's kind of like 20 minutes into a real conversation, maybe online or maybe having coffee somewhere. Maybe it's an hour. But within that period of time, if they don't think you're pretty awesome, if you don't get a feeling that they think you're rocking, not like you're, I don't know what, a gold medalist of this or that, but if they don't think you're awesome, they're DQ'd, disqualified. They are not a qualified prospect in sales language because they don't think you're great, and you may not be their cup of tea. And usually if they don't think you're great, really, by that first hour, they probably never will. They might, 20 hours in, but 90 times out of 100, probably, you could spend 20 more hours with them and they'll never really think you're great. So you want to think you're great. And flip it around. If you're with somebody and you don't think they're great, be polite, move on to someone you think will be great for you. Unless you really want to give it a little more time because you think they're shy or they're scared or there's some fears, and maybe there's some deep treasures inside that person that they're kind of guarding. All right. But often, if it just doesn't feel great, it probably never will be. And politely, you can, appreciate them and just, it's not a fit. Okay. And, not spend a lot more time with that person, which takes time away from actually ending up with someone that would be great for you.
Yeah. I know this isn't in your situation, but I've personally been in it. I know a lot of people do, where that last point you made around not being attracted or pursuing someone that's not actually into you, or at least is perceptually not into you.
Yeah.
Is more common than ever, I feel.
Oh yeah, I think
where
so.
this avoidant attachment style that people have of pursuing someone that maybe.
That's great. You get that, Sean.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And obviously that comes from, the lack of love we've had from parents and so forth.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that, because that's so common these days.
Wow, it's huge. And I'll be quick. One, because I should be quick and not ramble. And two, because I have to finish in about 5 minutes. So you're naming the ways in which people are drawn through, Freud called it the repetition compulsion, to reenact patterns from their childhood. And so if you have a person who grew up with avoidant attachment, which involves keeping people at an optimal distance as a mode of relating, it's not about not being attached, it's a way to be attached. through optimal distance, keeping them at bay. So then we would tend to choose people today that we can keep at bay because we don't like them so much, and we can keep them at bay because they don't like us so much either. Right. Yeah. So that's what you're saying. Fantastic. Very insightful. And so then the question is what to do about it. Yeah. I think self-awareness oneself, so that you can help yourself increasingly tolerate intimacy and closeness, so that it's less and less of a dreaded experience, and therefore you're not experientially avoiding it, right? Building up your capacity to tolerate that experience and realize again and again, it's okay. They're not like my parents. They're not like my horrible classmates in school. I can afford to open up. I can afford to let them in. I can afford to invest in them, emotionally invest in them. You can do that on your side. On the other side, if you're with someone and you're ready for closeness, you're ready for going all in with the right person, if all the lights are green in the dashboard, you're ready. It's scary, but you're ready to jump into the deep end of the pool. And you track, they're just not. They might be fun for a few months, but especially as young, people in their 20s and 30s, even 40s get older, clock's ticking. And you're thinking, as it were, this dog will never hunt. Do not send a duck to eagle school. If you're looking over there and you realize, well, this person, they don't want to go all in, then that they're not someone to be in the deep end of the pool with. And you yourself need to move on.
Yeah. So you're saying when a person is emotionally unavailable or has this avoidant tendency, without the pursuance of trying to improve themselves, is the idea that we should just walk away? Is that the wisest path from the clients that you've seen?
I think it usually is. It's complicated. Sometimes, we stay with, it's nice to have a boyfriend. It's nice to have a girlfriend. On the other hand, the life to me is an extraordinary opportunity. And there are plenty of opportunities for mild to medium relationships. And if you can't, if you leave this current mild to medium relationship, you'll probably find another one. It's the deep relationships, the deep end of the pool, all in people that are uncommon. And therefore, that's really important to aim for, and to not spin your wheels or, avoid, pursuing that and having that by getting spun into a backwater, kind of in the river of life. That's my 2 cents. It's my value system. I have certain privileges that enable me to say it. I'm not making a universal recommendation, but part of that's what I'd say. Now, that said, these days, particularly, there's so much understanding of psychology. It's all over the place. And that I'm going to do it my way, which is like aging California hippie way. But, if I'm dating with somebody and I like them, and I kind of notice maybe we've had sex, maybe we've crossed that line, let's say, or maybe not, either way. And I hear a little bit about their history. They've never had a long-term relationship, or they had a long-term relationship with someone who was pretty emotionally unavailable or traveled a ton. I'm thinking, oh, optimal distance, clever strategy. Then I'm getting some clues, maybe how they are with me. Even me, just if I were dating, I'm not being therapist. I'm just Rick, single, trying to find someone to go all in with. I might say to them, honestly, how do you feel about going all in a relationship? Have you ever? What was that like for you? Did you get your heart broken? Are you protecting yourself from that these days? Or, what was your family situation like? You're not playing therapist, but you're just trying to find out. And if someone, honestly, especially if you give them a few chances and you're kind of delicate about it and you're sweet and you're not interrogating, you're not critical, it's a friendly curiosity. If still that other person can't tolerate that, that's a huge clue. And then here's a kind of not a trick, a thing you could do, you go to the meta level where you talk about talking, you talk about your process. Then if they can't really go there, maybe, they seem pretty neat and you have compassion for them. They're pretty bruised by their childhood. Maybe around the second or third time you bring this up, you might say, well, I don't know. Have you noticed that it's kind of hard for you to talk about becoming more open with me? I'm prepared to go to the next step or two with you. And I definitely want to do that with someone. Now, maybe I'm not your cup of tea. Maybe I'm not the right person for you to do that with. But in general, I notice when we talk, you change the subject. You seem to get sort of irritated. You sort of punish me by not responding to my texts for a few days until we finally get together again tonight for dinner. Where are you at with this kind of conversation? Where are you at with greater emotional depth in your relationships? And then you're at a fork in the road and you give them maybe one last chance or two, but then you have to decide for yourself, where do you want to invest your precious time? This is your one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver put it. And, you decide, but I guess I'm biased myself toward don't let good crowd out great.
Yeah, beautifully said. I'm glad this call is recorded because I'm going to use that script in my next conversation, because you made it seem so easy, just the way you smoothly laid it out and asked those questions. Rick, I really appreciate your time. I know you got to go. So I want to make sure people can learn and find out more about you. You've got the new book, Making Great Relationships, which we'll link down. Where else can people learn more about you and discover more?
Kind. Thank you. I actually had to do a series of little scripts like that, and they're easier. It's easier to comment on a basketball play when you're watching it rather than in the middle of it. But anyway,
yes.
Just rickhanson.com, my name, or just Google me, S-O-N, Rick Hanson. Yeah, just right there. Tons of freely offered stuff, videos, audios, PowerPoint slide sets, brain science, practical guidance, a few courses for pay. They're priced reasonably, and we always give scholarships to people who have financial need. So just rickhanson.com. Also, beautiful. A shout out to my podcast, Being Well with our son Forrest. I should say his podcast. I get to come. And last, Global Compassion Coalition. Really worth looking at. How do we create kind of a mighty movement, a mighty stream grounded in compassion, in which people who are diverse can still come together around some basic things like, let's not have any more children starve to death. Like, hello. Let's get a grip on global warming. Let's get a grip on corruption in politics and money. But to do that, we have to come together at scale. So check out globalcompassioncoalition.org.
Beautiful. We'll have this link below. Rick, appreciate your time and the insightful conversation.
Great, Sean. Thank you. You too. Whoa, you could be a therapist.